I did not receive this story whole, and I never tried to pretend that I did. It reached me already marked by distance, already shaped by loss, carried across years that no one can count with certainty, handed down in a way that leaves no clean edge to grasp, as if the tale itself had been handled too many times for any one hand to claim it. I was never meant to witness it. I was meant to keep it from slipping entirely into silence. I was not the first voice. I knew that from the beginning, and I kept that knowledge close, because it tells you what kind of thing this is. Not a report from the eyes, but a memory that survived its own ruin. It came through names that had already aged, through men who repeated what their fathers had heard, and through fathers who had heard it from elsewhere still, until the telling learned endurance by losing what could not be held. The gaps are not decoration. The gaps are the price of survival. The story arrives already admitting its route. It does not present itself as something freshly seen. It does not claim clean clarity. It says plainly that it came from Egypt to Solon, from Solon into family keeping, from family keeping into a child's hearing, and from that child, grown old, into the present voice. And because it names its own path, it also names the kind of time it has passed through, time that erases. The priests who spoke it did not speak like poets trying to charm, or like disputants trying to win. They spoke like men who believe they stand beside a ledger older than any city. They spoke of cycles, fires and floods, not once but many times, erasures that do not merely kill bodies but break the chain of recollection itself. What can be written burns, what can be carved cracks, what can be sung fades when the singers die and no one remembers the tune. So each age begins again with fragments and calls those fragments its beginnings. That is why they said the Greeks were young, not young because their people had not lived long, but young because their memory had been interrupted again and again by destructions that swept the mind clean along with the land. They spoke of a time far older than the cities we know, older than the laws we keep, older even than the names by which we call the gods, and they spoke as one speaks of something settled long ago, not as one argues. And it was in that manner that Solon received it, not as an invention offered for entertainment, but as a remembrance offered like a recovered object, worn, incomplete, yet unmistakably heavy. Solon intended to give it form, to shape it into verse so it could travel farther without breaking, as a jar is sealed so what is inside will not spill. But time did not allow it. The vessel was left unsealed. The tale remained in his house as an unfinished charge, carried not as literature but as inheritance, passed through blood and familiarity until it reached Critias as a child at a festival, in the hour when families rehearse their old names and the mind makes room for what is older than the day. So it came to me not as proof, not as a monument, not as a map with a destination, but as a surviving form. If I harden it into certainty, I betray it. If I soften it into comfort, I betray it as well. The only honest way is to hold it in the shape it already has, a memory that does not ask to win, only to remain. And before Atlantis can be spoken, another city must be set down first, not because it is grander, but because it is the measure by which the island is weighed. The older Athens does not appear here as an ornament. It appears as a counterweight. Without it, Atlantis becomes only a marvel. With it, Atlantis becomes a comparison, and comparison is where the story begins to press inward. In that earlier time, Attica was not what later ages inherited. The land was fuller. The slopes held deeper soil. The mountains carried more earth upon their backs, and the rains had not yet stripped them bare and poured their richness into the sea. The country could feed its people without desperation and without driving them to chase excess as though excess were the only safety. The city itself was arranged to serve function before display. Its strength did not glitter. It held. On the height of the Acropolis, there were sanctuaries that belonged to the city's oldest identity, Athena and Hephaestus beside her, honored not as decoration, but as the divine likeness of what the city tried to be. Mind joined to craft, craft held under law, strength kept inside restraint. The guardians lived near that height not as private owners, but as a common body. Their arrangements were plain by choice, as though the city feared that those who protect it might one day be tempted to treat it as property. They ate together, they trained together, they held provisions in common. No man could become stronger than the law by becoming richer than his neighbor. Gold and silver were not merely discouraged. They were treated like a sickness for hands meant to remain steady in judgment. The land was apportioned so that each class had its place and function, and no one held more than was fitting. The city was not designed to reward hunger. It was designed to endure. Water mattered in that older Athens, because water is what a city remembers when it is lost. There was a spring upon the Acropolis that served the sanctuaries and the guardians, a living convenience that later earth shifts damaged, leaving only traces of what had been. Outside the city, the countryside was divided in a way that prevented exhaustion. Fields and pastures kept to their uses, orchards not consumed in haste, forests maintained for timber. The land supported a life that did not depend on conquest to feel secure. And because their way of life trained them in restraint, they were able to bear hardship without breaking into greed. When the time of pressure came, when power from beyond the strait moved inward and many peoples bent or fell away, some subdued by force, some frightened into submission, some unable to hold their alliances together, this city stood. It did not stand because it had the most ships or the richest metal. It stood because it was held together. And that is the kind of standing that unsettles power most, because it refuses the logic by which domination expects the world to collapse. Only after that is remembered can Atlantis be set in place. When the gods divided the earth among themselves, they did so without strife. Each received his share by allotment, as though the world itself could be portioned by agreement. To Poseidon fell an island beyond the strait later called the Pillars of Heracles, placed where the sea was open and where passages could be made, first to other islands, then onward to a great continent bordering the outer ocean. It was not described as a hidden world. It was described as a gate, a crossing point in the world's arrangement, a place that could become powerful simply by being placed where it was. The island was not empty. There lived Evenor, born from the earth, and his wife Leucippe, and their daughter Plato. When the parents died, Cleto remained alone upon a low hill near the center, with fresh springs and soil fit for life. Poseidon joined with her there, and the shaping of Atlantis began not with armies and ships, but with the land itself being cut and ordered around a single center. Poseidon did not leave that union without issue. From Cleto he had sons, 10 of them, born as 5 pairs of twins, so that the line would multiply without breaking, and the island would be ruled by kin who shared one beginning. When the sons reached maturity, he did not allow the land to remain a single undivided prize that might invite quarrel. Instead, he portioned Atlantis among them, giving each his own domain and kingship, while binding them all to one center. The eldest was Atlas, and to him fell the central region and the chief authority, so that the others, though kings in their own allotments, ruled under the primacy of his line. In this way, dominion was distributed without being scattered, and power was made to flow outward from a single heart. Around that hill he then formed rings, alternating circles of sea and land, so that the center became enclosed as if by natural walls. The tale lingers on this because it is the first clear sign of what Atlantis would become, a place that makes power out of arrangement. The rings were laid with purpose, their spans were measured, their sequence made approach slow, and where the rings narrowed, bridges were placed so that passage could be controlled rather than merely permitted. At first, men crossed in small craft. Later, as human building followed divine design, the crossings were strengthened and made into regulated ways. A channel was cut from the outer sea to the outer ring and widened and deepened so ships could enter. The city was not meant to remain a secluded sanctuary around a god's desire. It was meant to become a harbor city, a place where wealth and authority could flow in and out as steadily as water. Stone was quarried from the island itself, white, black, and red, and with it they faced the rings, roofed caverns, carved docks, and built walls that mirrored the layers of land and sea. One wall was plated with bronze, another with tin, and the innermost around the sacred center was covered with orichalcum, the metal said to flash like fire, valued second only to gold. The city did not merely possess metal, it displayed metal as skin, as if its wealth had become visible anatomy. At the center stood the temple of Poseidon and the preserved dwelling of Plato. The temple was described as vast and ancient, richly adorned, its walls and surfaces gleaming with orichalcum, so that even dim light seemed to cling to it. Within stood the statue of the god in a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses, so great that it nearly touched the roof, as though the building itself had been shaped to accommodate power rather than contain it. Around him were the Nereids upon dolphins, 100 of them, arranged not in motion but in order, an image of command over sea and passage that mirrored a city built upon channels, harbors, and controlled movement. This central precinct was not left as empty sacred ground. It was structured, planted, and maintained. Sacred groves stood nearby, not wild growth but living order. Springs rose within the enclosure, one hot, one cold, and they were gathered by stonework, guided and divided according to use. Baths were built with care and separation, for kings, for private men, for women, and even for horses, each given its own place, its own boundary, as though the city believed that even cleansing must follow rule. The presence of the horses was deliberate. They were not treated as tools alone, but as participants in the city's strength, worthy of care within the sacred zone itself. Everything near the center spoke the same language: hierarchy without confusion, abundance without excess. The bridges that crossed the rings leading inward were not left bare. They were fitted with gates and towers, their passages watched and regulated, so that approach itself became a discipline. Harbors lined the inner waters with docks and ship sheds, and dwellings for the guardians of the port stood close at hand, because the city's power depended not only on movement, but on the control of movement. The channel to the sea became wide and deep, a throat through which ships could pass with ease, and the outer ring formed a basin where vessels gathered in number. The city was not merely rich, it was arranged so that wealth could be used, directed, and contained. And at the heart of that precinct stood the pillar. It did not rise high like the walls, but it carried greater weight than any tower. It was made of orichalcum, and upon it were inscribed the laws Poseidon had given to his sons. The writing was not hidden. It was meant to be stood before. It was meant to be read aloud. It was meant to press back against the one who faced it. The pillar did not merely record law. It demanded acknowledgement. It stood where blood could touch it, where oath could bind itself to stone, where memory could be renewed, not in thought alone, but in act. At fixed times the kings gathered there, every 5th year, then every 6th, honoring both cycles, not allowing rule to drift into habit without interruption. They did not arrive as private men. They arrived as custodians of order, each ruling his own portion, yet all subject to what stood written before them. Their gathering did not begin with feasting, nor with comfort, nor with display. It began with restraint. Within the sacred enclosure they hunted bulls, not with iron weapons, but with staves and ropes, as though to show that force alone did not rule here, and that mastery did not require cruelty sharpened by metal. The capture itself was part of the rite, a reminder that power must first be controlled before it is exercised. When the bull was taken, it was brought to the pillar. There it was sacrificed, and its blood flowed over the inscription, darkening the letters for a moment before running down the stone. The act was not hurried. It was not theatrical. It was weighty. Life was set against law, not to diminish the law, but to renew it, as though the order of the city required living acknowledgement to remain alive itself. Wine was mixed in a bowl, and each king poured a libation and swore the same oath: to judge according to the written law, to punish the one who broke it, and to preserve the order established by the god. The oath was not individual. It was collective. No king swore alone, and none swore without witnesses. Only after this did they enter the hall of judgment. They were clothed in blue garments, the color chosen not for splendor but for solemnity, and they sat through the night by firelight. The darkness mattered. It slowed speech. It narrowed attention. Decisions were not rushed under the open sun. They were weighed when the world was quiet, when distraction thinned, when voices carried further than gestures. They spoke not as separate rulers, but as a council bound by a shared law that stood above any single will. When dawn came, Their judgments were written upon golden tablets, not hidden away, but placed among the offerings in the sanctuary, so the decision itself became dedication, and rule remained visible to memory. For a long time, this was not empty form. The ritual pressed inward as well as outward. The kings bore their power with moderation, while the divine element in them remained strong. They could look at gold without being conquered by it, because they did not need it to prove themselves. They could command without becoming drunk on command, because the oath still carried weight. Law was not merely written, it was felt. The pillar was not merely present, it resisted. Atlantis in this time was not chaos masked by splendor. It was power taught to kneel before its own limits. But memory does not stand still, and blood does not remain pure. Generations passed, and what had been divine in the rulers grew thinner as mortal nature pressed forward. The change did not announce itself. It did not break walls or silence rituals. The kings still gathered. The bull was still hunted. The blood still ran. The wine was still poured. The law was still read. Yet the inward pressure weakened. What had once constrained desire now merely accompanied it. Prosperity no longer felt like stewardship. It began to feel like entitlement. Restraint, once honored, began to look unnecessary. The law did not vanish, but it became something that could be interpreted, adjusted, postponed. And postponement, repeated often enough, becomes permission. They did not step out of the old order in a single motion. They stayed inside it. That is what made the change so difficult to see and so easy to deny. The laws remained where they had always been placed, on the pillar in the precinct, visible, unhidden, a thing you could stand before and read aloud. The appointed gatherings still returned, not at random, but by the old rhythm, in the 5th year, then again in the 6th, as if the city itself refused to let time become a blur. And when those years came, the kings still arrived from their regions, crossing the ring bridges toward the center, passing gates and towers that were built to slow approach and remind the body that rule was never meant to be casual. The rite did not cease. It continued with the same outward precision, the bull taken within the sacred ground, not with iron, but with staves and ropes, the animal brought to the pillar, the blood set against the letters so that law was darkened and made physical for a moment before the flow ran down and disappeared. The wine was mixed, the libations poured, the oath spoken in the same phrasing, in the same place, before the same writing. Nothing about the ceremony looked corrupted, because corruption of meaning does not announce itself by changing a gesture. Often it survives by preserving the gesture perfectly. After the sacrifice, they still sat through the night. The blue garments still marked them out as judges rather than feasting lords. Firelight still did what firelight always does. It narrowed faces, pulled attention inward, kept words from spilling too quickly. The darkness still pressed the gathering into a smaller world where voices matter more than movement. They still weighed disputes as a council, not as private rulers. And when dawn came, they still wrote decisions on tablets and placed them among offerings in the sanctuary, leaving behind a record that was also a dedication, a way of saying that judgment belonged to the order, not to the appetite of any one king. So if you looked only for obvious rupture, you would find none. The city did not grow noisy with rebellion. The pillar did not fall. The rings did not break. The channel to the sea did not close. Ships still entered and left the outer basin. The bridges still carried traffic. The gates still controlled passage. The docks still held vessels in their places. The ship sheds still lined the water like ribs. In the plain beyond, the trench still ran as a boundary and a roadway at once, and the straight canals still cut their fixed lines across the land, guiding water with the same quiet authority as before. Harvest still arrived in its season. Goods still moved along the routes that had been designed for movement. The system remained so effective that it disguised what was weakening, because what was weakening was not stone or timber. It was the pressure that stone and timber used to exert on the mind. That is how the long time before the fall should be imagined, not as a dramatic decline with clear markers, but as a continuation that slowly loses its inner weight. A son learned rule from a father who still felt the old law as a boundary. The son repeated the same acts, spoke the same oath, but carried it a little more lightly. The next generation carried it more lightly still, not out of deliberate impiety, but because they had grown up surrounded by success that never contradicted them. In a place where abundance is organized, where the channels run and the harbors fill, where tribute arrives and is counted, where fleets are maintained without strain, it becomes natural to mistake smooth function for moral health. Nothing breaks, so the mind assumes nothing is being broken. The law, in such a time, can remain present and yet lose its teeth. It is still read, still cited, still respected in language, but it becomes something that can be handled, interpreted, adjusted at the edges, delayed for later, softened by exceptions that feel practical, and then by exceptions that feel deserved. The oath is still spoken, but it starts to feel like confirmation rather than restraint, a ceiling of power already possessed, not a limit placed upon it. The pillar is still there, but it becomes a witness that is too familiar, like a face seen every day until its features are no longer noticed. And familiarity, when it touches sacred things, is one of the quiet forms of decay. This is why the story spends so much care on measurement and arrangement, the widths of rings, the spans of bridges, the straightness of canals, the division of the plain, the counted contributions from each portion. A place like this trains the mind toward calculation. It teaches rulers to think in systems, supplies, routes, schedules, portions, quotas, readiness. Even justice in time can begin to resemble administration rather than judgment, something managed rather than something feared. When decisions are always written and filed among offerings, the act can slowly become routine, and routine can numb the sense that anything truly irreversible is being decided in those night councils. And all the while, the outward beauty of the center continues to speak a language that can flatter the rulers, even as it once restrained them. The orichalcum still catches light on the sanctuary walls, making the precinct seem to burn with a steady fire. The temple still stands with its great image of the god in the chariot, the 6 winged horses stretched forward, the nereids arranged in their number around him. The springs still rise, hot and cold, and the baths remain separated by use, each kept in its place as proof that the city knows how to divide and order everything it touches. The order is real. The craft is real. That is not the point. The danger is that the city begins to trust the reality of its craft as though it were the same thing as the reality of restraint. So the years pass in a kind of polished stillness. The rings keep doing their work. They slow movement. They regulate approach. They teach everyone who enters that the center is reached by permission and sequence, not by rush. The harbors keep doing their work. They receive ships. They shelter them. They feed them. They send them out again. The canals keep doing their work, guiding water where water is needed, moving goods where goods must move, keeping the plain fertile and usable. This continuous success becomes its own argument. A city that functions so well begins to believe that function is its virtue. And because nothing external collapses, rulers can live for a long time inside the illusion that they are preserving the old order simply by repeating its forms. They protect what is visible because what is visible can be guarded. They do not notice that what is invisible, the inner reluctance to cross a boundary, has begun to thin. The old discipline becomes less a burden carried and more a posture maintained. Moderation becomes something admired in speech, but postponed in practice. Delay becomes the first small permission, and permission becomes a habit, and habit becomes the atmosphere in which the next generation grows up, believing that what they have inherited is not restraint, but entitlement wearing the clothing of law. That is the time before the turning outward, a long stretch where the city is still magnificent, still ordered, still obedient in ritual, still exact in its measurements, still functioning with the smoothness of a machine built by careful hands, yet gradually less capable of feeling why it was built in the first place. And when a city can no longer feel that, it does not need a new event to change its direction. The direction will change on its own, because the system that organizes abundance will eventually seek a wider field for its organization, and the rulers who have learned to manage without fear will begin to treat the world beyond the strait as another portion to be arranged. Beyond the rings, the island opened into a plain of enormous extent, carefully bounded, framed by mountains on one side and open toward the sea. It was not described like a painter describes a landscape. It was described like a lawgiver describes a foundation. The plain was divided and worked until it became a grid of production. Around it ran a great trench, broad and deep, cut like a boundary and a roadway at once, allowing transport to circle the plain without interruption. From that trench, canals were drawn inward at fixed intervals, straight as lines, crossing the plain so that water could be guided and goods could be moved. The result was not only fertility, but control. The land could be irrigated, the harvest transported, the whole system counted. It bore crops in their seasons, grasses for animals, timber for building. The island held metals in abundance, copper, tin, gold, and the tale names what the ground yielded, as though the ground itself had been made generous. Elephants lived there among the beasts of the island, named without wonder, because wonder was never meant to rest on the animals, but on the vastness that held them, and on the deliberate order that made such vastness usable. And from that same devotion to arrangement came the war system. The plain was not only farmland, it was a recruiting ground arranged in numbers. It was divided into many equal portions, and from each portion came its due, men, equipment, and supplies, so that the army did not have to be improvised but could be summoned. There were appointed commanders and defined contributions, and the whole apparatus was scaled for immense force. Infantry drawn from the plain, cavalry from regions suited to horses, chariot forces set as their own organized arm. The island's wealth meant it could maintain horses and chariots in number, and it could equip men without stripping the land bare, because the land itself had been made to produce for the state. And the sea forces were greater still. The harbor works were not a convenience, but a backbone. Ship sheds lined the waters, docks held vessels in readiness. The channel system that fed the city also served as the heart of its naval strength, because ships could be brought inward, supplied, repaired, protected, and sent out again with a regularity that made power feel effortless. A fleet maintained in this way is not merely a weapon for emergencies. It becomes a permanent expression of dominion. It moves even when it is not fighting. It teaches neighboring lands to measure their own freedom against its shadow. Then the balance tipped. Atlantis turned its power toward a single aim, to bring all lands within the strait under its rule in one campaign. Many yielded, some by force, some by fear, some because they could not stand alone against a system that moved without stumbling, supplied without delay, reinforced by calculation. To those on the edges of Atlantean reach, the order of the island arrived not as shared structure, but as command. What had been law within Atlantis became domination beyond it. Yet the older Athens did not yield. It stood with fewer men and fewer ships, but with an order that did not depend on abundance. It resisted and prevailed. Atlantis was turned back. Those enslaved were freed. Athens appears here not as a conqueror, but as a measure, proof that wealth and scale are not the only weights on the world's balance. That is the warning set into the tale where it cannot be missed. A people with less prevailing over a people with more. That is the defeat that should have restored humility. But defeat did not restore what had been lost in Atlantis, because what had been lost was not territory but restraint. When the gods perceived how far the Atlanteans had fallen from their former virtue, how deeply injustice had taken root, they resolved to bring correction upon them, so they might be chastened and restored to order. Zeus gathered the gods together in their most honored dwelling. He began to speak, and there the account ends. The words are not given, the judgment is not described, the sentence remains unspoken. What followed is known only by the outcome. In a single day and night of misfortune, violent earthquakes and floods came upon the land. The earth opened, the sea rose, and the island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves and vanished from sight. The sea in that region became impassable and unnavigable, choked with mud from the sunken land. There is no lament recorded, no list of the dead, no long description of suffering, only the fact, complete and final, like a door shut so fully that no hinge remains visible. After the sea closed, nothing replaced what had been there. No new shore rose, no altered shape announced itself. Only water remained, and beneath it the slow settling of what had been. The passage that once opened into movement closed into stillness. Ships no longer traced the route, not because it was forbidden, but because it no longer existed as a way through. The water thickened. The sea lost its clarity. Mud gathered where stone had once held. Memory does not move as events move. It does not follow lines or channels. It circles, it returns, it pauses where something resists being fully gone. In the mind, the rings do not sink all at once. They remain, one within another, traced again and again without being touched. The bridges still span water that is no longer there. The walls still follow curves that cannot be seen. The plain still lies open and counted, even though no foot crosses it. These shapes persist because they were never accidental. They were made deliberately, and deliberate forms do not vanish easily from thought. What remains hardest to lose is not the image of collapse, but the image of order. The city arranged itself so carefully that its absence feels structured. Even the mud seems to hold memory, as though it remembers what it covered. The sea above does not glitter with promise. It rests heavy, indifferent, unbroken. Nothing calls attention to itself. That, too, becomes part of the memory. Silence follows, but it is not empty. It is layered. It holds the echo of counted things, measured spans, allotted lands, cycles of years that once returned with certainty. The mind moves among these remnants slowly, without purpose, the way it moves among ruins that cannot be entered. There is no path inward now, no center to approach, only the knowledge that there once was one. The story does not continue because continuation would suggest repair. There is none. What remains is the outline left behind when structure is removed, the form without the body, the plan without the city. And this outline does not instruct or accuse. It endures, it waits, it allows itself to be remembered without insisting on being understood. That is how the memory rests, not as a warning spoken aloud, not as a lesson pressed forward, but as a space the mind returns to when it moves slowly enough to notice what is missing. The sea does not give answers, the mud does not explain, the rings do not re-emerge, and yet the shape persists, held not in land or water, but in the pause that follows the telling, when nothing more is added and nothing more is required. And after such a fact, the mind does not leap to the next event, because there is no next event in the account. What remains is the echo, the slow settling that follows when water closes over land. A thing can be gone and still leave its pattern behind. The rings of land and water do not disappear easily from remembrance because they were decisions repeated over generations. The bridges, the gates, the guarded passages, the channel cut to the sea, the harbors arranged so ships could be held and fed, the pillar that carried the writing, the blood that renewed it, the night judgments by firelight, the golden tablets placed among offerings. These were not accidents. They were expressions of belief, the belief that power could be structured safely, that abundance could be carried without distortion, that law could restrain those who possess the most. For a time, that belief held. The memory insists on that. Atlantis was not born corrupt. It was careful, deliberate, skilled. That is why it endures in thought when countless lesser cities vanished without trace. Its failure was not a failure of craft. It was a failure of endurance in the soul that held the craft. The end lingers not as spectacle but as obstruction, mud where ships once moved freely, a passage closed where passage once invited. Not only the city gone, but the path to it closed. No return, no recovery, no second foundation promised. The story does not invite rediscovery, it insists on absence. And absence is where memory does its deepest work, because what is gone cannot be corrected, it can only be carried. Thus, the visible trace of Atlantis ended, not because it lacked strength, not because it lacked wealth, but because it lost measure. What remains is not the island. What remains is the shape in the mind. A city arranged in rings, kings bound by oath, a pillar marked with law, judgments weighed through the night, decisions left as offerings, abundance turned into system, system turned into dominion. And beneath all of it, the slow shift that no one named until it was too late. And when the telling finally falls quiet, what is left is not an answer. It is space, room for the pattern to settle, room for the listener to recognize something familiar without being instructed, room for the silence to do what silence does at the edge of sleep.